Let's talk about the 12th house, and let's talk about the first house, and let's talk about what happens when they combine. How do you combine two houses? By combining their lords. So if you have the first lord in the 12th house, or the 12th lord in the first house, or if you have a conjunction of the first and 12th lord, or a mutual aspect of the first and the 12th lord, then you have combinations of the 12th and the first house. Or if you know the sequence of your houses in terms of how positive and negative and how prominent or non-prominent they are, then in that sequence you could have a 12 followed by a 1 or a 1 followed by a 12. Where would you get that sequence? How would you know that? You would have to get my Houses of Life report, which is available now on victorcara.com/H. It evaluates all of the houses in your chart, and one of the most important bits in it is it gives you a code, 12-number sequence, which tells you how the houses are working together. So using that code, if you find a 1 and a 12 in sequence or at opposite ends of the code, then you have the 12th and the first doing this dynamic together. All right, so let's begin by looking at what the first house represents. We've done this before, so we won't, dwell excessively on any of the points, but basically the first house is the place where the sun rises. It's defined as the eastern horizon. It's the area around the eastern horizon. Hence, it signifies things associated with sunrise. In other words, things beginning, like the day beginning. And beginning really means becoming visible. And on the basis of those two things, beginnings and visibility, the rest of the things the first house represent all sprout from that. So because it represents beginnings, when the chart is about a person, it represents the beginning of the person. So in other words, their birth. And because it represents their birth, it represents the thing that is produced by the birth, which is the body and the physical life and the self, which is anchored on that particular body. And since beginning actually means coming into visibility or coming to be tangible, that's also what the first house represents. The ability to make things real, the ability to produce tangible things. This is why it's such an important house, actually. It's not just because it represents self, but it's also because it represents our ability to make things real, to produce actual results. And because it's about visibility, it's also about the visible side of us. In other words, the visible side of the self. So like the body, the qualities of the body, the characteristics of the body, the way the body behaves, even so the person's character, the health, the appearance, the skills or the weaknesses that it has. So now that we know what the first house is, we can put that on the side for now, and then we look at what the 12th house is all about. The 12th house, as you can see in that little diagram, it's the area of sky that's just above the eastern horizon. So it signifies the weather, the clouds, the rain, the wind that act upon the eastern horizon, that erode the eastern horizon. And hence, what is symbolized by the 12th house is everything that would erode the things that are symbolized by the first house. So since the first house represents beginnings, the 12th house is antithetical to beginnings. And since the first house represents visibility, the 12th house is antithetical to visibility. So it represents unseen things. To expand upon these two basic themes of the 12th house, first of all, the anti-beginning thing. The 12th house is the house of subtraction. This is what it means to be anti-beginning. Beginning means to bring a plus to something or catalyze something. Give a little bit to something to make it come into being. So the 12th house is doing the opposite. It's taking a bit away to make it not come into being, to prevent it from coming into being, or to take it out of being. So the nature of the 12th house isn't productive. It's subtractive and reductive. So it's minimizing as well. Minimizing and reducing. Hence it also represents detractors. In other words, the agents of subtraction. Things that make you lose weight, for example. People that make you lose pride. Also, the 12th house represents your expenses, subtraction. removal of something from you, the way that you lose your money, the way that you spend your money, the feeling of loss, the feeling of being drained. And then finally, the end result of spending and expending, etc., you become exhausted. You become emptied. So the 12th house is an empty feeling, an exhausted feeling. It's a fatigued place. The energy has been spent. It's a sleepy place, a fatigued place, a quiet place. It's an expired place. It's a deathy place. It's leading towards death. It's leading towards expiration. And then on the other theme, the 12th house is antithetical to being seen. So it's about the unseen. So one of the important things is unseen, something you can't see, something you can't experience, is something that is not actually real. Reality means that which you can experience. So if the 12th house represents things which are not experienceable, that means it represents things which are not real, in the immediate sense of the word real. And hence it's also associated with fantasizing, daydreaming, dreaming at night, coming up with. This is one way in which the 12th house is creative. It's not tangibly creative and productive of actual physical results, but it's okay with coming up with ideas, especially dreaming up far out plans and far out possibilities and far out concepts and scenarios. Now, since it's the house of antithetical things to the visible, it represents unreality, but on the other side of the same coin, it represents spirituality. So spirituality is about the conscious entity that underlies the visible experience. And hence that also falls into the 12th house, because it's not the object that is being seen, but it's the seer itself. And spirituality and fantasy and spirituality and unreality, they have a thin border between them. Also on the basis that the 12th house represents the unseen, it therefore represents the unknown. Unseen also means unknown. So it has a bit of a confusion flavor, or an I don't know flavor to it. Hence, in the right combinations, it can lead to inquisitiveness. Unknown things also mean things that are on the other side of a wall. Things you can't see, things you don't know, things that are on the other side of the town, things that are on the other side of a border, the other side of a river, things you can't interact with, things you don't know about, other cultures, other nations, other countries. So the 12th house signifies foreign places. And in this day and age, when the whole world is quite connected, quite within the same room, the 12th house is particularly starting to take on an alien nature, like interest in outer space, interest in UFOs, interest in aliens, etc. Finally, the last thing I want to mention about the 12th house, which is very important to understanding it, is that it's the house of humility. And this is because it's the house of the unseen. So humility means yourself personally being unseen. So the 12th house is going to be behind the scenes, supporting from the background, not center stage, front and center. Hence, it also has a quiet nature to it. It's not a house which makes a lot of noise and draws a lot of attention. And it also has an isolated nature to it. Hence, people associate it sometimes to even prisons or hospitals or libraries or places where you go by yourself, because it's alienated and isolated and you won't be seen in this place. All right, now let's talk about what happens if we get these interactions between the first lord and the 12th lord, or if we get the houses to come in sequence in the house DNA code. What will always happen in astrological interpretation is when you combine two things, the things that they have in common will resonate loudly. And they could resonate dissonantly or harmoniously depending on whether they agree or disagree on those things. So here you have a lot of disagreement between the first and the 12th house, because by definition the 12th house is antithetical. It's erosive of the things the first house signifies. So since the first house represents beginning and the 12th house represents anti-beginning, that's a loud dissonant resonance. So what you can expect if you have a combination of 1st and 12th house, first of all, is the person will not be profitable, non-profitable. And I like that term non-profitable because it brings to mind, or it connotes non-profit organizations and so forth. And that's important because that's also part of the flavor of the 12th house is humility and self-sacrifice. So the person is not particularly productive, and they're not particularly concerned with making tangible results. And therefore they don't get very profitable, but they can donate their time and be very charitable with their time and energy. Another thing is they'll be critical of their own creations and also self-critical, actually, critical of their own body even. There'll be a lot of subtraction acting upon anything which the native brings into being. Hence, the body, they'll tend to downplay it or deny it or overly diet it, whether literally or figuratively. So the body will be depleted. It tends to get depleted. It tends to get tired, easy, and fatigued. It may happen due to their behavior, or it may happen due to illness. And you also find, finally, that these people are averse to basic pleasures. In other words, they're not the hedonistic type. They may have a voracious appetite, but it would be for fantasy things. They are not particularly hungry or interested in the basic physical experiences. Then the second thing, which is the major loud dissonant resonance between the 1st and the 12th, is that the 1st house is about visibility, but the 12th house is antithetical to visibility. It's the unseen. Hence, when you have natives with the 1st and 12th house together, they are in supporting roles in their life. They are in jobs that are behind the scenes. They work maybe on Hollywood movies, but they're not the actor in the movie. They're doing the editing of the video, or they're the cameraman, or they're the microphone holder. So even when they find themselves in big situations, they're behind the scenes or in a supporting role. They have aversion to recognition and aversion to social settings, because there's a dissonance here on being seen. So the native won't like to be seen. They might not realize they don't like to be seen. They may wonder why nobody recognizes them. But it's because they have timidity when it comes to being seen, and they don't step forward at the right time to be seen. So they will go unrecognized, hence they'll be in the supporting roles because they actually have aversion to being seen, and they would prefer to direct the attention to somebody else. Instead, they have this third trait, which is a lot of attraction to fantasy or psychology or spirituality, depending on what version of it we're talking about. So in other words, they don't really have appetite to be seen as they are in the real world, in the flesh. They prefer to direct the attention elsewhere and kind of dwell in an inner world where they're something else. So the clash between visibility and anti-visibility makes a native that prefers the things about themselves that are not visible, and therefore doesn't really show and push forward their own visibility. Finally, there is one thing about the 1st and the 12th house which does resonate harmoniously. And you may have noticed it kind of popping up in the background of some of the other things that I've said so far, but the 1st house represents your character, and the 12th house represents humility. 1st house is character because it's the visible traits of the body, so the way that you behave visibly, your public behavior. Humility is a great personality trait. It's a great character trait. So what you find when there's combinations of the 1st and 12th is actually the person is genuinely humble. And so they're usually not particularly troubled by the fact that they're in a supporting role, by the fact that they're not particularly recognized. by the fact that they're not the center of the party. They're kind of comfortable in that position. So this is the basic nature of how you interpret combinations of the 1st and the 12th house. Turning our attention to the house DNA code, if it's a 1 followed by a 12, it will be the most like this. If it's a 12 followed by a 1, it'll be slightly better. And it could even turn itself around to being you're able to give tangibility to intangible things. If you have 1 or a 12 on the left side and a 1 or a 12 on the right side, like if they're on opposite ends of the code, then it will be the opposite of this. So you will be a profitable person. You will be accepting of your own creations. You will not get tired easily. You will be able to enjoy the basic pleasures, etc. You will be able to step into the forefront. So that's the end of our basic discussion about the 1st and the 12th house and how they interact. Please stick around, subscribe, stay tuned as we do the rest of the combinations. Now, next week we'll be moving on to the 2nd Lord and its combinations with the various houses. Thank you very much.